Chapter 6. Find the right position. Weaknesses are relative. So, what exactly is a strength or weakness? Like most people, you are probably more familiar with weaknesses than strengths, but it likely shows up in your life under a different guise, fear. Isn't it wonderful how ingrained fear is in our psyche? Our minds have a way of fooling us into believing whatever worrying thought or emotion is crossing paths with us at the time. For example, if we receive an unexpected meeting request from our boss, we immediately become consumed by thoughts about how our world is about to come crashing down. Our mood suddenly drops, and we add fuel to it with thoughts of how we're not good enough. We begin to question the quality of our work, and sometimes also who we are. Are we about to get fired? We easily see criticism as a form of failure, like we've let someone down or that we've let ourselves down. We see criticism as a reflection of who we are as people. And in the moment, there's a kind of permanence to the fear, like we're somehow stuck with these flaws and permanently disadvantaged. Getting carried away like this is a dangerous habit that we love to nurture. But why on earth would we allow our minds to do this to us? How is it constructive? Well, the never-ending noise from our imagination helps to protect our egos. Our mind is constantly preparing itself for what it thinks will come. It tries to soften the blow by preparing us to expect the worst. Okay, thanks, I guess. But isn't it equally odd how fast this fear can dissipate? The moment we realize the meeting was just about our boss's upcoming holiday, our mood brightens completely, and we experience that refreshing feeling of relief. We laugh at ourselves for taking a silly meeting invite so seriously. If our mind were a friend giving us advice, we would quickly learn to disassociate with them because they're erratic, downright mean, and somehow manage to get their predictions impressively wrong each time. But our mind is no ordinary friend. It's a special kind of friend whose lies we choose to buy into each time. Unfortunately, trying to protect our egos from any tinge of pain is an impossible task and fundamentally corrosive to our maturity and growth. Our ego doesn't need protecting. To Sun Tzu, a weakness was nothing more than a temporary lack of strength. Weakness was simply an area where we, momentarily, didn't have sufficient resources to put up a resistance. The good thing is, as we become aware of the areas where we lack strength, we can work on improving it. We can adopt a new perspective. We can act differently. We can learn something new. We can talk to somebody else. We don't need to protect our egos because, guess what? We're not the same person as who we were 5 minutes ago. This tweak in thinking is subtle, but the impact is significant because now we're choosing to believe that weaknesses can shift and change over time. Or, to put it another way, we're choosing to believe that all weaknesses are relative. Your strengths and weaknesses are relative to the people around you. Have you heard of the theory that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with? That can either be good or bad depending on how you view your friends. But it's also extremely empowering. Just imagine you can significantly improve as a person just by replacing one of your friends. A disadvantaged army could walk for endless miles and still feel energized when they reach the battle site. Why? Because they weren't feeling rushed or pressured by the enemy. But an army that marched a short distance could feel like they had already fought many long and exhausting battles because they were constantly harassed in skirmishes along the way. Whether you viewed something as a strength or a weakness depended on the situation. The insight here was that strengths and weaknesses were fundamentally the same. Mistakes are the precursor for all victories. In one battle during the Three Kingdoms period, Sima had Zhuge Liang's army surrounded within the city of Exichang. Zhuge Liang had 2,000 soldiers, whereas Sima's army was many times that size. What did Zhuge Liang do? Instead of trying to defend the city, he opened the gates and told his men to stand down. He sat on the city wall and played music to pass the time while watching his soldiers play games. Sima's army, watching from a distance, was understandably confused. Sima said to his son, "Zhuge Liang is an extremely wise and intelligent man. There must be an ambush in the city. We have to retreat." His son protested, "No, father. Our spies have given us very accurate reports of the inside of the city, and there is no ambush there. But his father would not listen. What do you know, boy? Retreat! Of course, neither Zhuge nor Sima were confused. They knew exactly what they were doing. Zhuge knew that Simei's true objective wasn't just to win the war. He wanted to be the emperor. And to do that, he needed to take the throne by force. Zhuge wanted Sima to realize that he could take the city at any time, but taking it would not bring him any benefit. Yes, a victory would be the end of the war. His army could disband, and his soldiers could return home. But with them gone, so too would go his ability and opportunity to take the throne. Zhuge taunted him from a distance, subtly encouraging him to think about his future very carefully. Sima took the bait and ordered a retreat, knowing what he wanted more. Although it seemed as if Sima was on the offensive, it was Zhuge who was on the attack. Simei's army outnumbered the measly 2,000 soldiers defending the city, but Zhuge was attacking Simei's heart and mind. He was so effective that Sima didn't know how to counter. Battles, as it turns out, aren't won on the battlefield alone. Sun Tzu reminds us that there's no honor in making it hard for ourselves. No one receives an award for suffering. Sun Tzu said to attack weaknesses and avoid strengths. The easiest path to victory was to go on the offensive in novel ways that others haven't thought about. Seems deceptively straightforward if you ask me. And it would be straightforward if humans didn't have this curious habit of trying to overcomplicate everything and make rash decisions. We make mistakes in the heat of the moment, acting out or speaking before we've had a real chance to digest what's going on. When the stakes are high, our view of the situation is tainted by the fear or anxiety we're feeling in the moment. We're fooled by people who are great showmen or who look charming and wise. We lash out when we feel ridiculed, and we overreact when we feel rejected. And when our emotions are high, we decide to tackle matters head-on in the most direct way, burning all our energy trying to force our way through. In these moments, we ignore our intuition and focus too much of our attention on the shiny objects we see on the surface. How many would have chosen to leave the city defenseless like Zhuge? Can we learn to be patient in the face of pain and unfairness when every bone in our body is telling us to attack? It's hard, isn't it? The implication is that strengths and weaknesses, victories and defeats are built on mistakes. Our job is to focus on closing our own gaps and shortfalls so others can't exploit our mistakes. It's like spinning a rectangle around its center. If you spin it fast enough, it will start to look like a circle. It will lose its shape and its form. People won't know where to begin their offensive because we've made sure that they're not getting any clues from observing how we act or speak. They won't know where we might be weak. Get into the habit of making constant adjustments. When I was about 5 years old, I went with my parents to Hong Kong for the first time. Hong Kong was a very different place from Sydney, Australia, where I was born. It was crowded and overwhelming with loud noises and unusual scents. Anyone who's had stinky tofu would know what I'm talking about. We visited an herbal shop there, filled with all sorts of dried foods and roots, from Black Sea cucumbers to magnificently large ginseng roots that spread wide like the branches of a pale yellow tree. As my mother conversed with a man for our order of dried scallops, the man behind the counter pulled out a strange device. It was a long, thin metal rod about 15 inches in length, with a small tray hanging at the one end of the rod. The man lifted the rod to the level of his face and placed the scallops on one tray. On the other end, he placed a small metal weight. He slid the weight up and down the rod until the two floated at equal heights above the table. He didn't get it right the first time, though. He had to try with a couple of different weights, with different positions along the rod, until he eventually got it perfectly balanced. As a young child, I thought I was witnessing sorcery. The man was using a mechanical scale, a simple device that continues to be used in many parts of Asia today as a cheaper and more reliable alternative to electronic scales. You measure the weight of the object by first comparing it to a counterweight that approximately matches the object you are trying to weigh. Then you can get a more precise measurement by moving the counterweight closer or further from the object on the rod. For lighter objects, the counterweight would be closer to the center of the rod, while for heavier objects the counterweight would be on the end of the rod as far away from the object as possible. The skill in using the scale was knowing how to move the counterweight to the appropriate position, using some trial and error. I offer you this story and the image of the mechanical scale not only because I love Hong Kong and reminiscing about it brings me back to a happy place. I offer it because the scale is an apt analogy for what people struggle with the most in their life, having to weigh different options and make trade-off decisions. How do we choose between options when each option looks as good as the other? How do we choose between investments? How do we choose between colleges? How do we choose between sports teams? For crying out loud, how do we even choose between ketchup brands? We struggle with making choices because we want to make sure we're making the right choice. We treat each decision as though our future depends on it. Well, actually, your future doesn't depend on it. Your future isn't determined entirely based on one moment. Situations are alive. People are alive with conscious will, ideas move freely from soul to soul, and landscapes are constantly being shaped and reshaped by nature. So please try to relax a little bit. You never truly know whether you've made the right choice, because in this probabilistic world, any number of possibilities could be the right choice. The best you can hope for is to let the situation guide you as much as you can. Your foresight is limited, so you will have to make constant adjustments along the way anyway. And that's completely fine. Let me repeat a sentence again in case you missed it. Let the situation guide you as much as you can. Let the conditions, factors, attributes, state of affairs, environment, whatever you want to call it, help you. Work with it and don't work against it. Sun Tzu referred to this as knowing the importance of shi. Shy was a broad term used to refer to the circumstances of a situation. And when I say broad, I really mean broad. For instance, Sun Tzu writes exing shi to refer to the physical landscape and the non-physical social environment. He writes yu shi to refer to a person's advantage or superiority, and he writes shi li to refer to a person's influence over others. There's not much to be gained by being too technical about the translation. What matters is that you understand that Sun Tzu is asking you to be aware of any number of situational factors that are constantly shaping and reshaping how life might play out. Learn to be aware of the situation and sensitive to how it's changing. Seasoned leaders seem to be able to do this naturally, but it's something they've built through their many years of experience. They've seen the movie before, so they have a feel for how it ends, even though the actors might be different. They have an intuition about the situation and can read the dynamics of a room immediately. Think about what might affect how well a team works together. How dominating are the team members' personalities? How well do they communicate? What's their level of energy or drive to achieve the cause? Where are the team members physically located? All these factors will have an influence on the overall team's performance. When we make plans for this team, we must take these factors into consideration. If you know that two members of your team secretly hate each other, you should probably find a way to mend their relationship before you tell them to work in the same corner office together. If we want to maximize the effects of our actions, we have to learn to be less inwardly focused and have a broader view on what is going on around us. Know where you stand. But why leave it there? If we can see where things are heading and you don't like where things are going, why not try to change it? A simple analogy is that shi is like the wind. And people, well, they are like tall, thin blades of grass. When the wind blows, the grass will face the direction of the wind. If we know the direction of the wind, we'll know which way the grass faces too. If we can change the direction of the wind, we'll also change the direction of the grass. This is the paradox that Sun Tzu presents. Circumstances will determine our future, but we also have the power to change our circumstances. And if we could find an advantageous position, we wouldn't have to do much at all. finding the right position required understanding what we wanted to accomplish, understanding what we stood to gain or lose, understanding the people involved, who we were fighting, and how our resources stacked up against theirs. Having a favorable position was the most important requirement for success. If you didn't have the necessary conditions for success, you were setting yourself up for failure. In war, it meant that if you didn't have the right timing, resources, or political capital, you wouldn't fight. It was that simple. What you stood to gain wasn't worth the risk as the odds were stacked against you. This wouldn't mean that you would give up on your mission and sit idly waiting until circumstances changed. It only meant that you worked on getting those elements right before you moved forward. Zhang is tricked. Sukin and Zhang Yi were both students at a famous school in Giguzi during the Warring States period. After graduating from the school, the two men grew apart and separately nurtured their own careers. Sukin was quite successful and eventually became the chief administrator of the Six Kingdoms. Zhang Yi, however, was not so fortunate and after many years of toil could not find any position of significance. One night, Zhang Yi was invited to the kingdom of Chu for a grand banquet attended by many nobles of the kingdom. During the dinner, one of the nobles lost a precious jade bracelet. They searched everywhere for the bracelet, but could not find it. In frustration, the noble accused Zhang Yi of stealing it, claiming that another noble would not waste their time stealing the jade bracelet. The other nobles saw Zhang Yi as an outsider and joined forces against him. Although Zhang Yi claimed that he was innocent, he didn't have any way of proving it, so he was taken away for a beating. But Zhang Yi was defiant. Even after the beating, he maintained his innocence until the nobles were forced to release him. Zhang Yi's wife, alarmed and upset, said, "You've read so many books, yet they still treat you like trash." "What should we do?" "Nothing. If I still have my tongue, that is all I need." His wife shook her head. "Isn't your old friend the administrator of the Six Kingdoms? Why don't you see if he can find a role for you?" Not seeing any other options, Zhang Yi agreed to try. Later that week, Zhang Yi left home and stayed the night at a local inn before his appointment with Sukin. At dinner, he befriended a man who asked him what he was doing in town. Zhang Yi told him that he was there to see the administrator, to ask for work. He told him of his bad luck and his dreams of doing something more with his life. The man felt compassion for Zhang Yi and wished him well. The next morning, Zhang Yi went to see the administrator. He waited and waited the whole day, but his mission was fruitless as Sukin didn't have time to see him. Zhang Yi went again the next day, but again returned without any success. But Zhang Yi, being the stubborn man that he was not inclined to give up so easily. On the third day, he waited at the administrator's residence once more. But just as he thought he was about to be ignored again, Sukin walked in and greeted him excitedly. "My friend, are you doing well?" And Zhang Yi explained the events that had led up to their meeting. "I am so surprised," Sukin said. "I've always thought that I was not as good as you, but from the looks of it, even though that might be the case, my success seems to have far exceeded yours. Come, it is late in the day. Please stay and let's have some lunch together." Back then, when friends sat down for lunch, they wouldn't eat at the same table. They would sit at their own small table, positioned toward the side of the room, while the master of the house sat at a table at the front facing his guests. As the servants brought out their individual trays of food, Zhang Yi noticed that he was served different dishes than Sukin. The administrator was served a tray full of meats and seafood with bowls filled to the brim. Zhang Yi, on the other hand, was served a small bowl of rice, a small bowl of pork, and a small bowl of simple vegetables. At this point, Zhang Yi couldn't ask Sukin for a role anymore. How could he? He was being treated as a second-rate citizen. It would be too embarrassing. He said nothing and kept quiet, but it hurt him deeply. Abandoning his mission, he eventually said farewell to the administrator and returned to the inn. The man from earlier at the inn saw him and ran over, asking if the administrator had given him a role. "I would very much like to tell you, friend, but first I need some wine," he said. Zhang Yi shared with the man details of the encounter, telling him he felt like a servant compared to the administrator. "What are you going to do now?" the man asked him. Zhang Yi thought for a moment. Sukin is Chancellor of 6 out of the 7 kingdoms, so where could I go next? The only place I can go is the remaining kingdom of Qin. But how can I afford to go there? The man felt sorry for his new friend and decided to help him. I think that fate has brought us together today, so I will do everything in my power to help you. Tell me what you need, and I will give it to you as a gift. This was Zhang Yi's first opportunity in a long time, so he wanted to make the most of it. He told the man that he would need some money, a few horses, and a few fine clothes. The man was surprised at the strange request, but agreed. When Zhang Yi arrived at Qin, he was determined to be a different man. He chose to wear fine clothing, and he was very generous with the people he met. He held great feasts where he lavished the guests with gifts. As luck would have it, eventually someone arranged for him to see the king of Qin, and the two hit it off immediately. The king appointed Zhang Yi as his own administrator to keep him by his side. Zhang Yi couldn't believe it. He felt forever grateful to the man who had trusted him with so much. He went back to the 6 kingdoms to see if he could find him again. But when he found the man had a confession. He said, "I am not the one you have to thank for all this. It's Sukin. Everything from the time we met to me encouraging you to go to Qin was planned by Sukin." Zhang Yi was taken aback. But why? Why? Although there was an arrangement between the 6 kingdoms and the Qin kingdom, it's been a while since that arrangement was brokered, and the interests of the kingdoms were starting to diverge. Sukin worried that the arrangement would fracture at any time, and he wanted someone to help him on the inside of Qin to keep the arrangement going. He believed that you were the only person up to the task because he knew that you were more skilled than he. But he also knew that you were a proud and stubborn man, and if he had asked you directly, you would never have agreed to help. But now he has a favor to ask of you. You must promise that you will never allow the king of Qin to attack the 6 kingdoms or to break the peace agreement. Zhang Yi didn't know what to think. He couldn't believe that everything over the past couple of years was part of Sukin's elaborate plan. How could he refuse now? He had to follow through and agree. Everything he had was because of Sukin. Sukin was one of the most long-term strategic thinkers of the period, and he knew how to use people and resources to their most potential. When we have the right setup through our position in a situation, the actions we subsequently take will feel simple and easy. As we learn to observe events through the lens of Xi, people will believe that we have an uncanny ability to predict the future. But the truth is, we're not predicting the future. We're matching our actions to what's needed in the situation and not the other way around. Sometimes it's better not to be first. Sometimes, though, there are times where, quite honestly, I'm not sure what to think. I don't have any insight into what is really going on. Maybe I need time to process the situation and the people around me. In these times, Sun Tzu believed in the second mover advantage. If we don't have enough insight about what to do, we shouldn't do anything. What a radical idea! Acting first would prematurely expose our strengths and weaknesses. Instead, entice others to divulge more information about themselves. Entice them to speak or act. Spar with them and engage them in small skirmishes to test their limits and to get some idea of what their capabilities are like. The more we can lure others into making moves before us, the more information we'll have when we choose to make our moves. Their intent and plans will be revealed if we observe their actions with enough attention to detail. The donkey of few tricks. The Chinese expression, "the donkey has exhausted its tricks," is used to describe someone who has reached the limits of their capabilities. It comes from a story about a donkey that was brought to modern-day Gizhou by a curious farmer. Donkeys weren't natural inhabitants of the region, hence why the farmer wasn't successful. He decided to abandon the donkey and left it tied to a post on the side of a mountain. One day, a tiger noticed the donkey and was impressed by the size of the mysterious creature. He hid carefully in the woods and watched it from a distance. The tiger waited and finally conjured enough courage to approach it. He crawled slowly to the beast, but ran away when the donkey screamed loudly. "This beast makes such a loud noise. It must be very powerful," the tiger reasoned. But the tiger soon got used to the noise and decided to try again. This time, he approached the donkey from the rear, but the donkey kicked him with his hind legs. The tiger ran away again, but not far, as he realized he was relatively unscathed. Impatient, the tiger finally decided that the donkey had no other tricks besides braying and kicking, and went in for the kill. Through small observations, the tiger tested the limits of the donkey and was able to discover its true strengths and weaknesses. Battle of Xiaoting. Guan Yu was a general serving under the warlord Liu Bei during the late Eastern Han Dynasty. His deeds and moral qualities have become so admired over the centuries that still today, Guan Yu is often worshipped by people including police, businessmen, and even monks as the god of righteous war. In 220 A.D., when Guan Yu was captured and killed by Sun Quan's forces, Liu Bei wanted revenge. He moved to retake Jing province, deploying most of his army on the offensive. The area was defended by Luxun, a relatively junior general who was well versed with the art of war on paper but lacked any real-world experience of battles and war. He was completely paralyzed and unnerved by the responsibility of having to defend the area against Liu Bei's much stronger army. He said, "Liu Bei is leading an army east to attack, and his army's morale is incredibly high. His forces control an elevated region in the mountainous terrain, making it difficult for us to counterattack. What should we do?" He paced around the city, completely directionless, until one day he told his captains, "We have no choice. We have to fight." His strategy didn't go too well. Soon after the fighting started, they were on the run. "We are sacrificing our soldiers' lives for nothing," his officers complained. But surprisingly, this didn't put off Luxun. It in fact had the opposite effect. It gave him confidence. "Now we have them," he said. "I know how to proceed now, and I have devised a strategy for defeating the enemy." Luxun ordered his men to each carry a bundle of straw, which he used to launch a fire attack. In the end, Luxun had annihilated most of Liu Bei's army. Liu Bei, both furious and upset, lamented, "Is it not the will of heaven that I must be humiliated by Luxun?" Although Luxun was a new general, he understood the second-mover advantage and the power of using small exchanges to find the strengths and weaknesses of others for direction. These days, I wouldn't typically recommend setting anyone's tent on fire just to get a reaction out of them. But Sun Tzu's philosophy is the type of approach many companies use today to test and validate real-world assumptions before they invest or launch a product to market. This testing and experimentation is why tech companies like Airbnb have been so successful. They take time to watch how customers react to new product features before deciding whether ideas should be abandoned or expanded. Apparently, when Airbnb first launched, at a time when it was still struggling to attract users, co-founder Joe Gebbia had a hunch that it was the dismal photo quality of Airbnb listings that was stopping users from renting properties. So he rented a cheap camera and personally went to Airbnb listings to take more professional photos of the apartments. This single act had the effect of increasing the number of bookings per week by a factor of 2 to 3. Admittedly, this was at a time when Airbnb was only making $200 per week in revenue, but Joe knew from then that he was onto something. Today, we know that the quality of property photos has a huge impact on the number of prospective renters. It's not the outcomes of the experiments that matter, it's what you learn.